What's up, lore masters? One of the more interesting parts of lore is analyzing the different eras of Trek and really seeing how massively they differ. Even more so, looking at the early points of those individual eras. As an example, the beginning of the TNG era is massively different from the ending of that same era. Taking a look at the beginning of TNG, it starts with Jean-Luc Picard newly in command of the Galaxy-class starship, aptly named the USS Enterprise D. Interestingly, the Enterprise itself is more massive than what Starfleet has ever done historically. Ships like the Miranda, Excelsior, and even Constitution, while large, are notably smaller than this Explorer-class vessel. Given that the Enterprise is more Explorer-class than Defense-class, it shows a stark difference from the original series into the Next Generation. One of the first missions under Picard's command is to investigate the mystery of Farpoint Station while still trying to advance friendly relations. During this time, and indeed the entire TNG era, we don't see Section 31 specifically working in the background. But I do think we still feel the impacts of them even now. I mean, how else do you explain that Betazoid 80s hairstyle? Just looking good, Deanna. While on their way, the Enterprise D encounters something strange on their quote-unquote detector circuit. I'm guessing the guy at Con means scanners, but why use one word when you can make it infinitely more complicated with two? Ultimately, the Enterprise has some form of giant wall that prevents them from moving forward. Jean-Luc then orders them to go to Yellow Alert, even though the Red Alert klaxons were active at this point. But whatever, I guess. Going to Yellow Alert means that Worf activates both the shields and deflectors, because we'll learn later those are completely different things. This wall would be created by an entity known as the Q, and it would be the first time that, I'm aware of at least, Starfleet ever encounters them. Because it's the TNG era, really, who am I kidding? Because we're in the Trek universe on a Starfleet ship regardless of era, there is no real security on the bridge of the flagship of the Federation to stop the Q. Even Tasha, head of security, just sits back and looks flabbergasted at what is occurring. When security does arrive, they are cut off by the Q and sent back down into the ship, which is why you should have them on the bridge to begin with, but that's a rant for another time. Though, to be fair, later in the scene, we magically see security appear behind Tasha, so maybe the Q ultimately does let them in. Q tells Picard that Starfleet has come too far and that Picard needs to go back to his own solar system, which is interesting since the Q seems to only care about specifically Picard and humans. Even though we have a Klingon on the bridge and the Enterprise is generally a diverse ship with multiple species. I guess Q is either racist against humans or assumes they'll all understand that he means they all need to go back to their solar systems. Now, looking at First Contact specifically and not the rest of the conversation, Picard handles it very well. He more asks questions and tries to understand more than opposing Q initially. This is honestly the right call. I mean, the Q does seem extremely powerful, and so angering him would probably not be in the best interests of the ship right now. Q would ultimately decide to mock the US military by wearing one of their uniforms and stating that he needs a few good men to go and kill the commies. But don't worry, it gets better. Picard would call that uniform a costume and then ultimately mock people who would stand up against the Nazis and state that their ideas were ultimately nonsense. To be fair, he says even at that time they were getting better, but he still looks down upon those who had those ideas. So just wonderfully done. This aside, the interactions between the two would continue. There is a drastic divide between Q and Picard, or at least there appears to be. I'll be talking about this in a later episode, but I'm not so sure that Q is as he presents himself right now, but let's put that to the side. For the moment, let's go with his arguments. Q states that humanity has historically been violent, starting with tribal men that fought over which god symbol they believed in, nice religious bashing by the way, to all-out war and then into eugenics and ultimately into the stars. Once humanity had gotten into the stars, they found other races to fight, and while ever expanding, humanity would find allies and then go and kill even more people. If Q's argument is that humanity within this universe has an extensive body count, he wouldn't be wrong. Like at all. Humanity has always had a really great knack both in the real world and in Trek for killing. Whether it's in self-defense or someone just pisses us off, we're pretty creative. And honestly, Picard is absolutely useless in trying to counter this. I get what the captain was going for. Humanity has moved beyond the sum of its parts, that we're better than we were. However, that's not the only argument to make here. Even if we accepted that the existence of humanity necessitates some level of violence, humanity has brought a lot of relief to the galaxy, again at least within the Trek universe. Humanity united arguably the four most powerful species together in the Alpha Quadrant to form a federation that brings unheard of medical and science technology to the galaxy. The need to explore has opened the eyes of countless aliens and even brought peace. If you're going to look at the history of humanity, then that's fine, let's do that, but we have to look at all of it. Unfortunately, that's not the argument Picard uses. No, humanity has evolved so much that they aren't as pathetic as the US military. That's the message of the scene. Well done, writers, just top notch. 10 out of 10 will subscribe. After the back and forth, Q disappears for quote-unquote preparations of a judgment to come, and Picard orders that the vessel goes to maximum warp in an attempt to get away. Maximum warp, defined here at least, means that the ship will go well beyond the safety limits. The Galaxy-class starship runs like hell, and the wall that was stopping them becomes a sphere of some sort and tries to follow. The Enterprise would begin an emergency saucer separation with the crew moving to the battle bridge. According to the dialogue, this specific action is extremely dangerous, and within Trek fandom, there is some contention about it. From everything we know in canon, the saucer has no warp drive, nor would it be able to go to warp even if it did due to its lack of nacelles. However, in this episode, we see it fly off. I've heard multiple arguments on how warp drive works. Specifically, there's a good one by the Anti-Tracker that I'll include in the description. Basically, it makes sense that the warp drive doesn't necessarily cause the ship itself to accelerate, but creates a warp field, and the warp field moves while the ship stays stationary. If we accept this, saucer separation seems like it could be possible. You create and modify the field so that it continues to engulf both the saucer section and secondary hull, and then simply reverse the secondary hull and slingshot the saucer section forward. It wouldn't stay at warp for long, of course, but it would be able to get far enough away so that it could escape. Again, this has some holes in it, but for the most part, it's logical. Once the saucer is away and safe, Picard would turn the secondary hull around and confront the Q. He would send out a message that the Federation ship Enterprise would surrender. I do actually like the scene. It shows bravery, even though all of them are obviously scared. Additionally, it shows how humanity has evolved as Picard is sacrificing himself to save others. The sphere would turn back into the wall and completely surround the Enterprise, and Picard would either go into some kind of fevered pitch dream or be transported into an ancient tribunal. We'll discuss more on that after this. Here at the Star Trek Discovery Writers Room, a lot of people think that we don't take criticism well. That we don't care, but that cannot be further from the truth. In fact, we love everything our critics have to say. We personally go and find where they live to try to just have, a good conversation with them, because we care about diversity. We care about what people think, and we definitely want to hear your opinions, especially when you tell us that we're being sexist when we're trying not to be and trying to pander. Come on, let's go have a conversation. And remember, Star Trek Discovery Season 3 will be coming fairly shortly. As stated, Picard and crew find themselves in a trial where humanity utilized drugs to keep its military under control. From what we can see, humanity at that time had a very aberrant way of looking at justice. In fact, it was so bad that when a guard tried to get all of the prisoners to stand by using a machine gun, he gets the hell beat out of him by Tasha Yar, and then the guard himself is killed for being bested. Because of how much information is here, I'm going to break down the trial itself and the encounter at Farpoint on the next episode. While I did take some potshots at how they treated the US military, that aside, overall, I think that this scene in this episode really was done very well. While I won't agree with the way Starfleet went, the story is very interesting and we get to see the expansion of Trek itself. But all of this is just my opinion. What did you think of the story, at least all the way up to here? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Did you think it was a horrible way to start Trek back, or was it a good introduction? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe, and I'll